The combined human and Zephyrian fleet assembled at the neutral station. Orbiting Kepler Prime looked like nothing the galaxy had ever seen before. Human ships with their angular metal hulls floated alongside Zephyrian vessels that sparkled like carved jewels in the starlight. Jake stood on the bridge of the joint command ship, watching the two different technologies work together for the first time. Princess Lyra moved beside him, studying tactical displays that showed the Altarian and vegan fleets destroying each other across 3 star systems. The war had spread faster than anyone expected, and civilian casualties were mounting every day. The Altarians are using brute force attacks, while the vegans rely on defensive formations, Princess Lyra observed. Neither strategy is working because they are fighting the wrong war. Jake nodded, understanding her meaning. They're so focused on destroying each other, they've forgotten why they started fighting in the first place. Captain Lisa Brooks joined them at the command console with a grim expression. Intelligence reports suggest both sides are preparing to use planet-killer weapons. If that happens, we're looking at billions of dead civilians. The thought made Jake sick to his stomach. He had seen what war could do during his years in the diplomatic corps, but this was different. This was genocide disguised as military strategy. "How long do we have?" Princess Lyra asked, though her voice suggested she already knew the answer wouldn't. "Be good. 48 hours at most," Captain Brooks replied. "After that, the first planet dies, and there won't be any stopping the escalation." Jake stared at the tactical display showing the positions of all 3 fleets. The Altarians controlled the outer system, while the vegans held the inner planets. The combined human-Zephyrian force was caught in the middle, trying to prevent total war. "We need to split them up," Jake said, thinking out loud. "Force them to fight us instead of each other." Princess Lyra turned to look at him with concern in her silver eyes. "That would mean taking on both fleets simultaneously. We would be outnumbered 3-1. Not if we're smart about it," Jake replied, pulling up fleet deployment charts. "Human ships are faster and more maneuverable. Zephyrian ships have better shields and more powerful weapons. If we coordinate properly, we can use our strengths to offset their numbers." The next 24 hours were spent in frantic preparation as human and Zephyrian officers learned to work together. Jake was amazed at how quickly the 2 crews adapted to each other's methods. Princess Lyra served as translator and cultural bridge, helping both sides understand alien tactical concepts. The plan they developed was risky but elegant. Human ships would use hit-and-run attacks to draw the Altarian fleet away from civilian targets, while Zephyrian vessels engaged the vegan defensive positions. The key was timing and coordination between species that had never fought together before. Everything went wrong from the moment they entered the combat zone. The Altarian commander immediately recognized the threat posed by the combined fleet and ordered all ships to focus fire on the human Zephyrian force. Within minutes, they were taking heavy casualties. Jake watched human and Zephyrian ships explode on the tactical display and felt despair growing in his chest. The plan wasn't working, and people were dying because of his decisions. Princess Lyra placed her hand on his shoulder and spoke through their mental link. "Do not lose faith, Jake Martinez. Sometimes the greatest victories come from the darkest moments." Before Jake could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the ship. Captain Brooks rushed to the communication station with her face pale. "We're receiving a priority transmission from the Zephyrian capital," she announced. "Duke Cress has declared Princess Lyra mentally incompetent and claimed the right of succession. He's ordered all Zephyrian ships to withdraw from the battle." Jake felt his blood turn to ice. Without the Zephyrian ships, they couldn't hope to stop both enemy fleets. Billions of civilians would die, and their mission would fail completely. Princess Lyra stood perfectly still for a moment, then moved to the communications console. "Open a channel to all Zephyrian vessels," she ordered in a voice that carried absolute authority. "Princess, with respect, Duke Cress has assumed command," the communications officer replied nervously. "Duke Cress is not here," Princess Lyra said with steel in her voice. "I am." "Open the channel." The communications officer looked at Jake, who nodded encouragement. Within moments, Princess Lyra's image was being broadcast to every Zephyrian ship in the fleet. "My people," she began speaking in the formal manner of royal addresses. "Duke Cress has declared me unfit to lead because I have learned to feel compassion. Because I have chosen love over duty. Because I have dared to believe that our strength comes not from purity, but from our willingness to grow and change." Jake watched the faces of Zephyrian officers on the screen as they listened to their princess speak with passion and conviction. "I stand before you not as your princess, but as someone who has discovered what it means to be truly alive," Princess Lyra continued. "The humans have taught me that emotion is not weakness, but the source of all meaningful action. That love is not corruption, but the foundation of everything worth fighting for." She paused and looked directly into the camera with tears streaming down her crystalline cheeks. "I choose Jake Martinez as my husband, not because of politics or duty, but because he saw me as a person worthy of love. He taught me to laugh and cry and hope and dream. He showed me that strength comes from caring about others more than yourself." Jake felt his heart swell with pride and love as Princess Lyra continued her speech. "Today we fight not for territory or resources or ancient grudges," she said with growing intensity. "We fight for the right of all species to choose their own destiny. We fight so that children of every world can grow up free from the hatred of their parents. We fight because someone must stand between the innocent and those who would destroy them." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Zephyrian ship captains began reporting their loyalty to Princess Lyra over Duke Cress. Within minutes, the entire fleet had recommitted to the mission. The battle that followed became legend throughout the galaxy. Human ships danced between enemy formations while Zephyrian vessels provided cover and fire with mathematical precision. Jake coordinated the attack while Princess Lyra managed fleet communications using her telepathic abilities to link human and Zephyrian minds. When the Altarian flagship finally surrendered 12 hours later, both enemy fleets had been scattered and the threat to civilian populations eliminated. The cost had been high, but the alternative would have been genocide. Jake found Princess Lyra in the medical bay, tending to wounded crew members from both species. She looked exhausted, but radiant as she moved between beds, offering comfort to humans and Zephyrians alike. "The war is over," Jake announced quietly. "Both sides have agreed to peace negotiations." Princess Lyra smiled and moved into his arms without caring who might see. "Then we have won the right to choose our own future, Duke. Cress won't give up easily," Jake warned. "He'll try to challenge the marriage again. Let him try," Princess Lyra replied with confidence. "I am no longer the frightened princess who hid her emotions behind a mask of duty. I am someone who has learned to fight for what matters." The wedding took place 3 weeks later on the neutral station where the combined fleet had first assembled. Representatives from dozens of species attended the ceremony that marked the beginning of a new era in galactic politics. As Jake and Princess Lyra exchanged vows, he felt her voice in his mind, asking the question that had started their entire journey. "You are truly choosing me as your wife," she said with wonder still coloring her mental voice. "Not for my title or my father's approval or political advantage." Jake smiled and spoke his answer aloud so everyone could hear. "I choose you, Lyra Veltar, because you are brave enough to change. Because you taught me that love can bridge any gap between different worlds. Because you are the most extraordinary person I have ever known." Princess Lyra laughed through happy tears as she replied, "Then let us build a galaxy where love matters more than tradition and courage counts for more than purity." Their first child was born 2 years later with her mother's crystalline beauty and her father's warm brown eyes. She became the first of a new generation that will grow up seeing differences between species not as barriers, but as opportunities for understanding. And in the history books of a dozen worlds, their story became proof that sometimes the greatest strength comes not from staying the same, but from having the courage to become something better. Duke Cress stared at Princess Lyra with disgust clearly visible on his crystalline features. His guards raised their energy weapons, but before anyone could fire, the cavern began to shake violently. Emergency alarms echoed through the tunnels as rocks fell from the ceiling. "What is happening?" Princess Lyra asked, grabbing Jake's arm for support. A Zephyrian messenger burst into the cavern, breathing hard from running. "Your Grace," he gasped, looking at Duke Cress. "The Altarian and Vegan fleets are attacking each other near the border. Their war is spreading into neutral space." Jake felt his heart sink. The Altarians and Vegans have been enemies for decades, but their conflict had remained contained in their own systems. If they were fighting in neutral space, it meant other species would be forced to choose sides. Duke Cress lowered his weapon with obvious frustration. "This conversation is not finished, Princess, but duty calls." He turned to his guards. "Escort them both to the palace. The Emperor will want to speak with them." The trip back to the surface was tense and silent. Jake could feel Princess Lyra's fear through their new mental connection and tried to project calm reassurance. The telepathic link between them was still active, though neither of them fully understood how it worked. Emperor Thane Veltar was waiting in the throne room with his military advisors when they arrived. The Zephyrian ruler looked older than Jake. "Remember," with worry lines etched deep in his crystalline face. "The situation is grave," the Emperor announced without preamble. "The Altarian-Vegan conflict has erupted into full-scale war. 3 neutral systems have already been attacked. The Galactic Council is calling for peacekeeping forces." Jake stepped forward despite the hostile looks from the Zephyrian court. "What do you need from humanity, Your Majesty?" Emperor Thane studied Jake with calculating silver eyes. "That depends, Lieutenant Commander. Are humans prepared to risk their lives for species they barely know?" "We've done it before," Jake replied, thinking of the colony rescue mission. "We'll do it again if necessary." Princess Lyra moved to stand beside Jake, which caused murmurs of disapproval from the assembled nobles. Father, the humans have proven themselves capable allies. Their medical assistance saved thousands of our people. "Yes," Duke Cress interrupted with venom in his voice. "And in the process corrupted my niece beyond recognition. She has become infected." With alien emotions and primitive thinking, Jake felt anger rise in his chest, but Princess Lyra squeezed his hand in warning. Getting into a shouting match with Duke Cress would not help their cause. Emperor Thane raised his hand for silence. "The Council requires a unified response to this crisis. Traditional military tactics have failed to contain the conflict. We need something different," Jake thought quickly. The Altarians were aggressive and warlike, while the Vegans preferred defensive strategies. Neither species trusted outsiders enough to accept peacekeeping forces from a single alien government. But maybe there was another way. "What if we combined our fleets?" Jake suggested. "Human and Zephyrian ships working together under joint command. It would show unity between our species and give us tactical advantages neither side could achieve alone." The throne room fell silent. Jake could feel the shock radiating from the assembled Zephyrians through Princess Lyra's telepathic abilities. Joint military operations were unprecedented in their history. "Impossible," Duke Cress declared. "Zephyrian military purity cannot be contaminated by alien influences. Then Zephyrians will continue to die while you argue about purity." Jake shot back before he could stop himself. The insult caused an uproar among the nobles, but Emperor Thane held up his hand again. "The human speaks harshly, but not without reason. Traditional approaches have failed us. Perhaps it is time to consider new methods." Princess Lyra stepped forward with determination in her voice. "I volunteer to serve as liaison between our military forces. I have experience working with humans and understand both cultures." Duke Cress turned to face her with fury blazing in his silver eyes. "You would contaminate our military with alien thinking as you have contaminated yourself." "I would save lives," Princess Lyra replied with steel in her voice. "Something our pure traditional methods have failed to accomplish." Jake made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. He dropped to one knee in front of Princess Lyra and spoke in a voice that carried throughout the throne room. "Princess, Lyra Veltar, I request your hand in marriage as a symbol of the alliance between our peoples. The silence that followed was deafening. Jake could hear his own heartbeat as every eye in the room stared at him with shock. Marriage between different species was unheard of in Zephyrian culture. Political marriages were always arranged by families for strategic advantage. Princess Lyra stared down at him with her mouth open in disbelief. You are asking me to choose, she whispered. No one has ever asked me to choose, Jake looked up at her with all the love he felt shining in his eyes. I'm asking you to choose me, not because of politics or duty or alliance. Because I love you and I want to spend my life making you happy. Princess Lyra's composure finally cracked completely. Tears streamed down her face as she laughed and cried at the same time. You would marry me for love, she said in wonder. Not for my title or my father's approval or political advantage. I would marry you if you were a farmer's daughter on a backwater world, Jake replied honestly. Your title means nothing to me. Your heart means everything. Emperor Thane stood up from his throne with an expression Jake couldn't read. This is highly irregular. Zephyrian royalty has never intermarried with alien species. Duke Crest stepped forward with rage contorting his features. This is an abomination. The bloodline must remain pure. I will not allow this corruption to proceed. You will not allow. Princess Lyra turned to face her uncle with fire in her silver eyes. I am third, in line to the throne. I outrank you, Duke Crest, and I accept Jake's proposal. The throne room erupted in chaos as nobles argued and shouted. Some supported Princess Lyra while others backed Duke Crest. Jake remained kneeling until Princess Lyra helped him to his feet with a smile that lit up her entire face. Are you certain? Jake asked quietly, so only she could hear. This will change everything for you. Princess Lyra placed her hand over his heart and spoke through their mental link so no one else could hear. You have already changed everything for me, Jake Martinez. You taught me that love is not weakness but strength. That emotion is not instability, but the foundation of all meaningful action. I choose you because you saw me as a person before you. Saw me as a princess. Emperor Thane finally restored order with a gesture that silenced the room. The proposal has merit from a political standpoint, he said thoughtfully. A marriage between our species would cement the military alliance and demonstrate unity to the galaxy. It would also create the first interspecies heir in Zephyrian history, Duke Crest snarled. The throne would be contaminated forever. Throne would be strengthened, Princess Lyra countered. Our children would understand both cultures. They would be bridges between species instead of barriers. Jake felt his heart skip at the mention of children. The idea of raising a family with Princess Lyra filled him with joy and terror in equal measure. Emperor Thane was quiet for a long moment, studying both Jake and his daughter. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of history. Very well. The marriage will proceed pending the success of our joint military operation. If the combined fleet can end this war, then the Union will have proven its worth. If not, he looked directly at Jake with cold eyes. Then the human will be exiled, and my daughter will marry within her own species. Princess Lyra squeezed Jake's hand tightly. Then we had better save the galaxy, she said with a smile that was equal parts determination and joy. Duke Crest stepped forward with murder in his eyes. This will not stand. I will not allow our pure bloodline to be corrupted by alien contamination. Then you stand against the Emperor's decision, Jake said quietly. That sounds like treason to me. The accusation hung in the air like a challenge. As Duke Crest realized how far his opposition had taken him, with a final look of pure hatred, he bowed stiffly to Emperor Thane and left the throne room followed by his supporters. Jake had the uncomfortable feeling that they had just made a very dangerous enemy. The journey to Zephyr Colony 7 took 3 days aboard a combined human and Zephyrian medical ship. Jake watched Princess Lyra work alongside human doctors with a focus that impressed everyone on the team. She had never shown emotion publicly before, but now she made no effort to hide her concern for the dying colonists. Dr. Amy Foster from the human medical team pulled Jake aside on the second day of the journey. "Your princess is remarkable," she said quietly. "She's absorbed our entire medical database and is already suggesting improvements to our treatment protocols." "She's not my princess," Jake replied automatically, though he felt warmth at the words. "And yes, she's incredible. Her people don't give her nearly enough credit," Dr. Foster smiled knowingly. "The way you two look at each other suggests otherwise about the ownership question. Just be careful, Jake. I've seen the political reports. There are Zephyrians who don't want this cooperation to succeed." Jake knew she was right. Ambassador Kelm had made several pointed comments about humans corrupting Zephyrian purity, and there had been whispered conversations that stopped when Jake entered the room. But Princess Lyra seemed different now. The cold mask she wore in public was slipping, and Jake caught glimpses of someone warm and passionate underneath. When they arrived at the colony, the situation was worse than anyone had expected. The plague had spread to over 60% of the population, and the colonial medical facilities were overwhelmed. Bodies were being stored in refrigerated warehouses because there weren't enough cremation facilities to handle the death toll. Princess Lyra stood at the observation window of their ship, looking down at the colony with tears running down her translucent cheeks. It was the first time Jake had seen a Zephyrian cry, and the sight broke his heart. "So many dead," she whispered. "I should have been here sooner. I should have done something." Jake moved to stand beside her. "You're here now. That's what matters." "Is it?" Princess Lyra turned to face him with anguish in her silver eyes. "In human stories, the heroes always arrive in time to save everyone. In reality, we arrived too late and watched people die." Jake wanted to comfort her, but wasn't sure if physical contact would be welcome. Zephyrians had strict rules about touching without permission. Instead, he spoke softly. "The heroes in human stories aren't heroes because they never fail, Princess. They're heroes because they keep trying even after they fail. Even when it hurts. Even when it seems hopeless." Princess Lyra stared at him for a long moment, then did something that shocked Jake completely. She reached out and took his hand in hers. Her skin was warm despite its crystalline appearance, and her grip was surprisingly strong. "Teach me to be a hero, Jake Martinez," she said with quiet determination. The next week was a blur of medical procedures and desperate attempts to find a cure. Jake worked alongside Princess Lyra in makeshift laboratories, while human and Zephyrian doctors treated the sick. The combination of human adaptive medicine and Zephyrian precision technology was proven more effective than either approach alone. Jake noticed that Princess Lyra was changing in ways that went beyond her medical knowledge. She spoke to dying patients instead of just examining them. She held the hands of frightened children, even though physical contact was taboo in her culture. She laughed at human jokes and cried when patients didn't make it. "You're becoming more human every day," Jake observed one evening as they reviewed test results. Princess Lyra looked up with a tired smile. "Is that good or bad?" "It's good," Jake said without hesitation. "Very good. Their breakthrough came when Princess Lyra suggested combining human genetic therapy with Zephyrian crystal healing techniques. The hybrid treatment was unprecedented, but it worked. Within days, they had saved hundreds of lives and developed a cure that could be mass-produced. The celebration was cut short by an urgent message from the Zephyrian capital. Emperor Thane Veltar wanted his daughter to return immediately for an important meeting about her future. Princess Lyra read the message with growing concern. "My father is displeased," she said quietly. "There have been reports about my behavior here, about my cooperation with humans." Jake felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's temperature. "What kind of reports?" "The kind that suggests I have been corrupted by alien influences," Princess Lyra replied with bitter humor. "The kind that say I have forgotten my duty to Zephyrian purity." When they returned to the capital, Jake immediately sensed a change in atmosphere. Zephyrian officials, who had been polite before, were now openly hostile. Guards followed the human delegation everywhere, and their quarters were clearly being monitored. Ambassador Kelm visited Jake on their first night back with news that made his blood run cold. There will be a formal inquiry into Princess Lyra's conduct during the medical mission, the ambassador announced with obvious satisfaction. Duke Cressmore-Den has raised concerns about inappropriate contact with alien species. Jake had heard of Duke Cress. He was Emperor, Thane's brother and leader of the traditionalist faction that opposed any contact with other species. If he was involved, then Princess Lyra was in serious trouble. What kind of inappropriate contact? Jake asked, though he suspected he already knew. Physical touching without proper protocols. Public displays of emotion. Adoption of alien customs and behaviors. Ambassador Keln listed the charges with grim satisfaction. The Duke believes Princess Lyra has been mentally compromised by exposure to human psychological influences. Jake wanted to argue, but knew it would only make things worse. In Zephyrian society, showing emotion was considered a sign of mental weakness. Princess Lyra's newfound humanity would be seen as evidence that she was unfit for her royal duties. The next few days were tense. Princess Lyra was confined to the royal palace while Duke Cress gathered evidence for his case. Jake tried to focus on the trade negotiations, but found himself constantly worried about what was happening to her dot. His chance came when Princess Lyra sent him a coded message asking him to meet her in the crystal caves beneath the capital. Jake knew it was dangerous, but he couldn't ignore her request for help. The caves were a maze of tunnels carved from living crystal that pulsed with natural energy. Jake found Princess Lyra waiting in a chamber deep underground with fear in her eyes and tears on her cheeks. "They want to remove me from the succession," she said without preamble. "Duke Cress has convinced my father that I am mentally unstable due to alien contamination." Jake felt anger surge through him. "That's ridiculous. You saved hundreds of lives on the colony. I also showed emotion in public and touched aliens without permission," Princess Lyra replied with a shaky laugh. "In their minds, that proves I am unfit to rule." Before Jake could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed through the tunnels. Princess Lyra grabbed his arm with panic in her voice. "They found us," she whispered. "Duke Cress has been having me followed." Armed guards appeared at the tunnel entrance, led by Duke Cress himself. The Zephyrian noble was tall and imposing with the coldest silver eyes Jake had ever seen. "Princess Lyra, you will return to your quarters immediately," Duke Cress commanded. "And you alien will be arrested for corrupting a member of the royal family." "I haven't corrupted anyone," Jake said, standing protectively in front of Princess Lyra. "I've been her friend." "If that's corruption, then your society needs corrupting." Duke Cress raised a weapon that crackled with energy. "Friendship is weakness. Emotion is instability. You have infected the princess with your primitive human diseases." The weapon fired, but Princess Lyra threw herself forward and grabbed Jake's hand. Suddenly, Jake felt his mind expand as Princess Lyra's telepathic abilities connected them directly. He experienced her memories and emotions in a flood of sensation that left him gasping. He saw her lonely childhood where showing affection was punished. Her years of training to suppress every natural feeling. Her desperate hunger for genuine connection that she had never dared acknowledge. And underneath it all, her growing love for Jake that terrified her because it went against everything she had been taught. The mental connection worked both ways. Princess Lyra experienced Jake's memories of laughter with friends, his childhood, surrounded by family who hugged him and told him they loved him, his dreams of exploring the galaxy and making friends with strange new species, his growing feelings for her that had nothing to do with her royal status and everything to do with who she was becoming. The experience lasted only seconds, but it changed everything. Princess Lyra looked at Jake with wonder and fear. "Is this what friendship feels like?" she whispered. "This connection. This caring without condition." "Yes," Jake replied, though his voice was hoarse from the mental contact. "This is what love feels like too." Duke Cress and his guards were advancing with weapons drawn, but Princess Lyra stood up with new determination. "I choose Jake Martinez," she announced in a voice that carried through the crystal caves. "I choose friendship over duty. I choose love over tradition. I choose to be human." Jake woke up in what he assumed was a Zephyrian medical facility. The walls glowed with a soft blue light, and the air hummed with energy that made his teeth ache. His shoulder was wrapped in something that looked like crystallized fog, and the pain had faded to a dull throb. Princess Lyra sat in a chair beside his bed, reading from a device that projected holographic text into the air. She looked up when Jake stirred, and for a moment her silver eyes showed something almost like relief. "The healers say you will recover fully," she said in that careful way she had of speaking aloud instead of using telepathy. "The plasma burn was severe but not fatal." "Good to know," Jake said, trying to sit up. "How long was I unconscious?" 18 hours, Princess Lyra replied. "I have been studying your species' cultural records during this time. Your behavior last night makes more sense now, though it remains highly illogical." Jake noticed she had dark circles under her eyes like she hadn't slept. "You stayed here the whole time." Princess Lyra looked away. "I was curious about your motivations." Nothing more. Something in her tone suggested otherwise, but Jake didn't push the issue. He had learned that Zephyrians considered emotional displays to be weakness, and Princess Lyra seemed to be struggling with something she couldn't quite understand. "What did you find in your research?" Jake asked, genuinely interested. Princess Lyra gestured, and the holographic display changed to show images of human history. "Your species has a pattern of behavior that defies rational explanation. Soldiers who sacrifice themselves for strangers. Parents who adopt children from enemy nations. Individuals who risk everything to save people they have never met." Jake watched images of human rescue workers pulling survivors from disasters and soldiers carrying wounded enemies to safety. "We call it compassion. The ability to care about others even when it doesn't benefit us." "But why?" Princess Lyra leaned forward with genuine confusion. "What evolutionary purpose does it serve to help those who cannot help you in return?" Jake thought about how to explain something so fundamental to human nature. Maybe it's not about evolution. Maybe it's about being the kind of people we want to be. "We help others because that's what makes us human." Princess Lyra was quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. "In Zephyrian society, we are taught from birth to control our emotions and act only according to logic and benefit. To feel too much is to be weak. To act without clear advantage is to be foolish." "That sounds lonely," Jake said without thinking. "Princess." Lyra's head snapped up, and for a moment Jake saw something raw and vulnerable in her expression before she looked away again. "Loneliness is inefficient. We have duty and purpose." That should be sufficient. Before Jake could respond, the door chimed, and Ambassador Keln entered with several other Zephyrian officials. The ambassador's mental voice was cold as ice when he spoke. "Princess Lyra, you should not be here alone with the alien. It is inappropriate." Princess Lyra stood up with the fluid grace of someone born to command. "I am conducting cultural research, Ambassador. The human's actions require study. The human acted on primitive instinct," Ambassador Kelm replied dismissively. "There is nothing to learn from such behavior." Jake felt his temper rising, but forced himself to stay calm. Getting angry wouldn't help anyone, and it would only confirm their opinion that humans were unstable. "With respect, Ambassador," Jake said carefully, "sometimes instinct is more reliable than calculation. If I had stopped to think about the logical response, Princess Lyra might be dead." The other Zephyrians exchanged looks that Jake couldn't interpret, but Princess Lyra stared at him with an expression of fascination. "You admit you acted without thinking," Ambassador Kelm said with what might have been amusement. "You prove my point about human primitiveness." "Maybe," Jake agreed. "But Princess Lyra is alive. Sometimes primitive works better than advanced." The room fell silent. Jake realized he had probably just insulted their entire civilization, but he couldn't bring himself to care. These people seemed to think emotion and instinct were weaknesses when they were actually humanity's greatest strengths. Princess Lyra suddenly spoke up. "I wish to continue my cultural research. Ambassador Kelm, please arrange for the human to have access to our historical archives." I want to understand this concept of compassion better. Ambassador Kellen's mental voice carried clear disapproval. Princess, that is highly irregular. Aliens should not have access to our records. Then it is fortunate that I outrank you, Princess Lyra replied with steel in her voice. The human will have access to whatever materials I deem necessary for this research after the other Zephyrians left Princess Lyra helped Jake to a viewing chamber filled with holographic displays. For the next several days, they went through thousands of years of human history together. Jake explained context while Princess Lyra absorbed information with the speed that only a telepathic mind could manage. She was particularly fascinated by stories of humans who had helped alien species. The rescue missions during the Centauri plague outbreak, the human ships that had evacuated civilians during the Vegan Civil War, the adoption programs for orphan alien children after various conflicts. Your people actively seek out ways to help others, Princess Lyra observed after viewing records of human medical teams treating wounded enemies. Even when those others have been fighting against you, we try to, Jake said. It's not always easy, but we believe everyone deserves a chance at life and happiness regardless of where they come from. Princess Lyra turned to stare at him. Even people who have tried to kill you. Especially them, Jake replied. Hatred only creates more hatred. Kindness can break that cycle. Princess Lyra was quiet for several minutes processing this idea. When she spoke again, her voice was thoughtful. In our society, those who show mercy to enemies are considered weak. Those who help others without gaining advantage are considered foolish. Yet your species has become one of the most successful in the galaxy using these supposedly weak strategies. Jake nodded. Maybe strength isn't about being the hardest or the coldest. Maybe real strength is about caring enough to keep trying even when it's difficult over the following days. Jake noticed changes in Princess Lyra. She began asking questions about human emotions and relationships. She wanted to understand why. Humans form friendships across species lines and how they maintain loyalty to people they had never met. The change became most apparent when news arrived of a plague outbreak on Zephyr Colony 7. The disease was spreading rapidly, and their medical technology was proving inadequate to stop it. Hundreds of Zephyrians were dying, and the colonial government was requesting emergency assistance. Jake was in the viewing chamber with Princess Lyra when the news came through. He watched her silver eyes fill with something that looked very much like anguish as casualty reports scrolled past. I should go there, she said quietly. Those are my people dying. The plague is fatal to most humanoid species, Jake replied, checking the medical data. You be walking into a death trap. Princess Lyra stood up with determination. Then I will die with honor serving my people. Jake studied the plague data for several more minutes, thinking hard. Maybe there's another way. Human immune systems work differently than most species. We might be able to help develop a cure. You would risk your lives for Zephyrians, Princess Lyra asked with disbelief. After the way my people have treated you, Jake smiled. That's what friends do, Princess. They help each other when things get difficult. Princess Lyra stared at him for a long moment, and Jake saw something shift in her expression. The cold mask of Zephyrian nobility cracked just a little, and underneath Jake glimpsed someone who was tired of being alone. Friends, she repeated the word like she was tasting it. Is that what we are, Jake Martinez? I'd like to think so. Jake replied, honestly. For the first time since Jake had met her, Princess Lyra smiled. It was a small, uncertain expression, but it transformed her entire face from cold alien beauty to something warm and very human. Then let us go save my people, she said. Together. Jake Martinez stood on the bridge of the starship Endeavor and watched the massive crystal city floating in space grow larger on the main screen. The Zephyrian capital ship looked like someone had carved a mountain from pure diamond and filled it with golden light. He had seen many alien worlds during his 15 years in the diplomatic corps, but nothing quite like this. Captain Lisa Brooks walked up beside him and shook her head. Still can't believe they built that thing without any metal framework. She sighed quietly. Our engineers are going crazy trying to figure out how it doesn't just fall apart. Jake nodded but kept his eyes on the approaching city. 3 months ago, first contact protocols had been established with the Zephyrian Empire through long-range communications. The aliens had seemed polite enough in their messages, but there was something cold about their tone that made Jake uneasy. Still, the chance for a trade agreement was too good to pass up. The Zephyrians had energy technology that could revolutionize human space travel. Remember, Jake, Captain Brooks continued, these people think with their minds instead of talking. Most of the time. They consider our need to speak out loud primitive. Try not to take offense if they seem rude. I'll do my best, Jake replied. He straightened his dress uniform and checked his translation device one more time. The Zephyrians spoke perfect English, but their cultural meanings often got lost in translation. The Endeavor docked with a smooth precision that made Jake proud of his crew. Within minutes, he was walking through an airlock into what looked like the inside of a crystal cave. Everything sparkled and reflected light in ways that hurt his eyes. The Zephyrian delegation was waiting for them. Jake had seen pictures, but meeting them in person was different. They looked almost human, except their skin had a translucent quality like frosted glass, and their eyes were solid silver without pupils. The leader stepped forward, and Jake felt a strange tingling in his mind. "Welcome, Lieutenant Commander Martinez," the alien said without moving his lips. The voice echoed inside Jake's head. "I am Ambassador Kelmore Sick. We will escort you to the diplomatic quarters." Jake fought the urge to rub his temples where a mild headache was forming. "Thank you, Ambassador. We're honored by your invitation." The Zephyrian tilted his head slightly. "You speak aloud unnecessarily. We can hear your thoughts if you allow it. I prefer to speak with my voice if that's acceptable," Jake said politely. "It's our custom." Something that might have been disapproval flashed across the ambassador's features. "As you wish. Princess Lyra Veltar will serve as your cultural liaison during these negotiations. She has studied your species extensively." They walked through corridors that seemed to pulse with their own internal light. Jake tried not to stare at the architecture, but everything was so alien and beautiful that he couldn't help himself. Other Zephyrians they passed looked at the human delegation with what Jake interpreted as curiosity mixed with disdain. The diplomatic quarters were luxurious in an uncomfortable way. The furniture looked more like crystal sculptures than chairs, and the bed appeared to be made of some kind of hardened light. Jake wondered how anyone was supposed to sleep on it. "The welcoming ceremony will begin in 2 hours," Ambassador Kelm announced. "Princess Lyra will brief you on proper protocols. Do not embarrass yourselves." After the ambassador left, Jake turned to his aide, Lieutenant Danny Cooper. "Well, that was friendly," he muttered. Danny grinned. "I've seen worse. Remember the Altarian delegation that kept trying to eat our shoes?" Before Jake could respond, the door chimed and opened to reveal a Zephyrian female. Like the others, her skin had that translucent quality, but there was something different about her. Her silver eyes seemed more expressive, and she wore what looked like a crown made of crystallized starlight. "Lieutenant Commander Martinez," she said aloud to Jake's surprise, "I am Princess Lyra Veltar. I understand you prefer verbal communication." "Thank you, Princess." "That's very considerate," Jake replied with a slight bow. "I hope we can learn from each other during these negotiations." Princess Lyra studied him with an intensity that made Jake uncomfortable. "You are different from what I expected. Our research suggested humans were more aggressive and unpredictable. We can be when we need to be," Jake said carefully. "But we prefer cooperation when possible. That's why we're here." "Indeed," Princess Lyra walked around him in a slow circle like she was examining an interesting specimen. "Your emotional emanations are quite strong. Most curious. We Zephyrians have learned to control such primitive impulses." Jake bit back his first response, which would have been somewhat less diplomatic. "We find our emotions help us connect with others and solve problems creatively." "How inefficient," Princess Lyra commented, but there was something in her tone that suggested genuine curiosity rather than contempt. "Come, I will explain the proper Behavior for tonight's ceremony. Try not to disgrace yourselves too badly. The next 2 hours were a crash course in Zephyrian etiquette. Jake learned that touching another person without permission was considered assault. That showing emotion publicly was seen as weakness. That disagreeing directly with someone of higher rank could end negotiations immediately. Your species seems to have a great many rules, Jake observed as Princess Lyra finished explaining the 17 different ways to bow depending on social rank. Order brings peace, she replied. Chaos brings suffering. Surely even humans can understand this basic principle. We have rules too, Jake said. But we also believe in adapting when situations change. Sometimes the old ways aren't the best ways. Princess Lyra stopped talking and stared at him. For a moment, Jake wondered if he had said something offensive. Then she spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. What a strange concept. The welcoming. Ceremony took place in a vast hall that looked like the inside of a geode. Hundreds of Zephyrians sat in perfect silence while their leader, Emperor Thane Veltar, gave a speech that Jake heard directly in his mind. The mental contact felt invasive and uncomfortable, but he endured it politely. The dinner that followed was a minefield of potential mistakes. Jake used the wrong utensil for the third course, which caused several Zephyrians to exchange meaningful looks. He accidentally sat in a chair reserved for higher-ranking individuals, which required a formal apology. Worst of all, he laughed out loud when Lieutenant Cooper made a quiet joke causing the entire room to fall silent and stare. Princess. Lyra leaned over and whispered, Your emotional outbursts are causing considerable distress. I'm sorry, Jake whispered back. We express joy differently than your people. Joy. Princess Lyra repeated the word like it was foreign. You find amusement in this situation. Not in the situation, Jake explained quietly. In the company of friends. We laugh when we're happy. Or comfortable with others. Princess Lyra was quiet for a long moment. How peculiar. The evening was going badly when everything went wrong. Jake was trying to navigate the dessert course without causing another cultural incident when the lights suddenly dimmed. Dark shapes moved in the shadows at the edge of the great hall. Assassins, someone screamed in Jake's mind, and suddenly, the room erupted in chaos. Energy weapons fired from concealed positions around the hall. The Zephyrian guards moved with incredible speed, but they seemed confused by the attackers' tactics. Jake saw Princess Lyra standing frozen in the center of the room with a look of shock on her face. Without thinking, Jake threw himself forward and tackled the princess to the ground just as a plasma bolt seared through the air where her head had been. The energy blast caught him across the shoulder and back, sending waves of agony through his body. Stay down, he gasped, rolling to put himself between Princess Lyra and the attackers. The battle was over in minutes. Zephyrian security forces rounded up the surviving assassins while medics tended to the wounded. Jake found himself lying on the crystal floor, with Princess Lyra kneeling beside him. Why? She asked in a voice full of confusion. Why did you shield me with your body? You are not sworn to protect me. You barely know me. Jake tried to sit up and immediately regretted it as pain shot through his injured shoulder. You were in danger. That's enough. Princess Lyra stared at him like he was speaking a completely foreign language. That is not logical behavior. You could have been killed. Maybe, Jake admitted. But I couldn't just watch someone get hurt when I could do something about it. For the first time since he had met her, Princess Lyra's composed expression cracked. Something that might have been wonder or fear flickered across her features. What manner of beings are you? She whispered.